Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord. Today is going to be kind of a special catching up segment here. I am joined with Grayson Forsberg again. We decided to just catch up and kind of talk about everything that's happening in the world. So Grayson, you and I were talking, I think it was last week, about how kind of there's a rise in authoritarianism in the United States. And you had an interesting point. You said that it's a problem that both the left and the right are facing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think we were discussing how the left tends to be a little bit more authoritarianism, and now that the right has been a little bit more anti-democratic, in the sense that the left likes big government. They always have. They like to impose stuff on, go against maybe a little bit more of like federalism. Like they don't like it when certain more Republican states do different things that they want. But then the Republican Party is now going almost like we discussed this in our last catching up, that with the Section 230, like that's anti-democratic in the sense that you're getting rid of free speech, and that the Republicans were actually supporting, or a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them were supporting Trump in that. And so it's eerie to see both parties going, a little against our kind of constitutional republic.
Yeah, the way I've been kind of like phrasing this, and I've been kind of writing some stuff on this the last couple of days, obviously none of it published, but just ideas. And it's kind of that the right, in my opinion, has become anti-democratic in some ways, and the left has become authoritarian, because like obviously the big issue in the US was tyranny of the majority versus like maintaining some voice of the minority. And Alexander Hamilton was always afraid of mob rule, which would be minority, which would be kind of what we saw. Obviously, I'm like hyperbolically speaking here, but it would be like kind of the January 6th insurrection, when you have a small mob of people who don't agree with a democratic outcome. Right. And that's why you see the right trying to cut, like I think it was like 50 state legislatures, or not 50, like 40 state legislatures were trying to cut back on voting rights after the election, because the Republican parties realized they need a smaller amount of people to vote because they have a better chance of maintaining. But then on the left, because they're in power and they know they have a majority of the country that votes with them, they're going to exercise the power to then do what they want to do. So I feel like there's that political compass, and Drew and I did an episode on it where it's like left and right, horizontal, you have Republican, Democrat, your typical values that go with that. It's horizontal, it's simple, and I think we've focused on that for so long. But then if you look at the vertical axis, you have kind of the far top would be authoritarian and the bottom would be anarchy. And I feel like the right has always been in the lower quadrant of that in some ways, in terms of personal responsibility, individualism, libertarianism. Right. But now they've kind of crossed that axis up to the more higher authoritarian part. And if you look at other right-wing people that have done that, it's Pinochet in Chile and Adolf Hitler. Those are other right-wing people who have had policies and movements that have crossed that line into a high authoritarian, And so it's interesting to me because I think we're looking at the axis wrong. It shouldn't be left or right anymore. It should be, why are we moving towards authoritarianism?
Right. Yeah. And, going back to what you're saying about Hamilton, like in the Federalist Papers, there always was, his whole point was to get rid of the tyranny of the majority. And I mean, basically now you'd see Republicans are always enforcing this with the Electoral College, and basically, they're always defending that because it gives, smaller states more emphasis. But now, like you were saying, they're more accepting of this more fringe ideology, and it's moving towards values that they've, stated that they've stood for, and yet it's almost antithetical to their positions here.
No, absolutely. And see, my takeaway is that the Republicans now are not just the minority party in Congress, but because they've kind of cast out the moderates and have kind of embraced QAnon and the big lie and the Trumpism, that they're now a minority in the United States in what they believe. And so they can't win a general election currently with the views they have. So to me, that screams anti-democratic means to try to get power again.
Yeah. And I think it even, goes deeper within the party that basically, like we discussed in our other episode, that the Republicans have positions that they stand for, but they've never enforced them. They've never gone after them. And now that they're, minority party in Congress, they don't have the presidency, and they've seen that, Trump has been able to build so many, you could say faux conservatives, and you get into, more fringe Republicans, but like you said, they're losing the moderate Republicans, and with that, they're accepting these, fringe ideologies that have basically driven them to go towards, non-democratic kind of values.
Yes. And I would definitely agree too that the left has done it in other ways. It's because they are the ones that are kind of controlling the mainstream culture and now the government.
Right.
That for whatever they kind of says goes in terms of mainly culture and kind of identity politics. So I would definitely say that, yeah, it's a problem of both sides. My big issue is that I feel like unity is out the door. And that's something I think I want to talk to in a later episode longer. But, so I think we now have this debate where what is the Constitution and what does it do? And why are Democrats now against the filibuster? They want to bring Puerto Rico in. They want to bring Washington, D.C. in as another state. And to me, it seems like it's always been here. You had James Madison, who wrote in a multitude of Federalist Papers talking about how we needed minority representation, right? But then we had Alexander Hamilton talking about the fear of the filibuster and the fear of the Electoral College because mob violence always ends up happening. And so I would argue that this has always been inevitable. It's nothing new. It's the fact that kind of the Republican Party has always wanted to embrace more minority power, and the left or more big government people have always been more for the majority.
Yeah, and I would say, because we were talking outside of this podcast about, what was it, George Bush Jr. was the last president in 2004, was it? You were saying that had the last kind of popular vote?
Yeah, he beat John Kerry, and that was, I think, the last time since Reagan that a president won the popular vote on the right.
Yeah, and so the right has always kind of been, in the population, the minority. But back what you were saying with what does the Constitution say about what you were saying, adding Washington, D.C. versus, you have the counties in Oregon who are trying to go out of Oregon to become part of Idaho, was it, or something like that? Because it's more with their values, I guess, or their beliefs. And you can see that's on both sides, I guess. It's you can see that the Republicans are struggling with their minority. They want to add more, or reposition their districts and stuff, versus the left. Kind of, if they added Washington, D.C., they would add more people in there in Congress. But basically, I guess what I'm trying to get to here is that it's a left-right issue, trying to add more power versus less power. The minorities trying to gain more power, the majorities trying to maintain their power. And I guess it's better, we were talking about the dynamics of it, looking more to the democratic versus authoritarian side, not looking at the Democrats or the Republicans as the enemy, but looking at those who stand with our constitutional, rights and what this democracy, this democratic republic stands for. Basically, whether you're on one side or the other, it doesn't matter. Like, you shouldn't outright just, not listen to the other side if they have something to say that's actually democratic. There's obviously, like we were discussing, authoritarians on probably both sides, and there's anti-democratic people on both sides, but obviously we think that one side is a little bit more of one of the other. But just thinking about it, if we want more of a unified country, we have to figure out what we stand for, and obviously we stand for our constitutional values and our democracy. And when you see one side or the other starting to flirt with, anti-democratic values or authoritarian values, then you start to look and say, no, we have to bring this back together, I guess.
Absolutely. And I want to keep this one short, but what to me it seems like is that Biden's call for unity might be too late, because I feel like after the last 4 years we've had, I think Biden's era of being a unifying moderate is over. I don't know if someone like Biden, especially because he's older now and clearly does work with the more progressive part of the party, I don't know if unity is particularly possible in the terms of actually unifying both parties. But I would argue that trying to unify the country against these measures to stop voting, to stop free and fair elections, I think those are some things that maybe could be taken out of unity. When Biden said he wants unity, I mean, you had Bill Kristol for the Bulwark calling out for working for Biden, or not for Biden, working with Biden for moderate conservatives, because his argument is that this unity is not about right or left. It's about limiting these anti-democratic measures that seem to be growing. And I think that's kind of also what you're saying, because, we have states, especially in the Northwest, which is interesting, like Oregon, Washington, that seem to have these rural areas that don't agree with the state governments. They're talking about, trying to file petitions to join Idaho, Wyoming. And I kind of go, I don't think that's good for our democracy, but it shows where we're at. Any last thoughts on this one?
Yeah, like you said, unity is really hard at this point. It's going to be so much work to get back to a sense of where we were actually kind of just Americans. But like you said, there is really no, as I would see it, no really constitutional way for that to happen. I understand that people can vote if they want to change and go to a different state or change state lines and stuff, but it's not really going to happen. And so, like you said, we need to take a step back here and just focus more on democratic values and where we stand as a democratic republic versus where we stand left or right.
Absolutely. And I'm sure down the road, Drew and I are going to want to bring you on again. We were talking about trying to get another debate set up, so hopefully that'll happen. Grayson, as always, thank you for coming on, and take care. And thank you guys for listening. As always, we are back on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, YouTube, all those random-ass third-party sites that I don't even know how we're on, but they seem to give us good numbers. So keep just trying to talk to each other. Remember, the fringes are out there to muddle the waters. Unity doesn't mean always left or right. It means standing for what we believe in. So take care, Grayson. Thank you.